We missed 1 week, so let's do a quick recap and then we'll catch up. Today, you find that if it's very unlikely we will do class activity, although we'll finish the one we started 2 weeks ago. Okay, so because we have lots of catch up. Apparently, it is good. Like I said the last time, this class, there are plenty of questions to answer. All right, so it is good because you clarify things. It will be my job to try and still speed up, and then we do sufficient catch up. Okay, so don't worry about asking questions. All right, now if you I think before I begin, right, I have one warning. If later on, if my cat screams, all right, just ignore. If he screams very loudly and refuses to budge, then I'll have to somehow trap him inside the toilet. Okay, but for now he is quiet. He is for some time I have not been home. For last time we worked from home, and then he got used to a bit to that, to the noise, and now he's probably not again, because just before we started he was screaming away. I managed to calm him down. So all right, I'll let you know first so that you don't become too distracted in case you hear a sudden meow. I will see how it goes. All right, now we were talking about sensation and perception, right? So we talked about visual perception. Now you find that, hey, but that's like there's some levels of physiology, human physiology involved. Yes, because it's very difficult to draw a clear line right nowadays between what is purely biology, or rather biology-based stuff, versus behavioral stuff. But you notice that we actually, when we looked into it, we understood the structure mainly to support how the function works. So in other words, right, we tried to understand the first part of the thinking process, which is part of psychology, right? Thinking. So lay people will tell you, oh, thinking, that's when you process the information. But what people are missing is that the processing of information is when you first received it. And of course, this will throw an extension question. How did we even manage to know we received it? All right. And if you think back, we talk about something called the ganglion cells in the eyes. Now, the ganglion cells, how are they connected to the retina cells? Someone? Or is after 1 week break, then that's it? That doesn't sound too good. I don't worry, we'll do revision later on. I'll send you mock MCQs. Anyone? Any feature you can remember about how ganglion and the retina cells are connected? Nobody?
I thought the ganglion cell is the one that is the first layer of transmission to the brain.
Yes, it is. So the thing is, that is the first layer. Then how does it connect to the retina cells? So retina cells refer to, now if you recall, right, if you look at my hand, the light comes in this direction. It will hit, and then there are cells here, all right, that will pick up the signal. So when you talk about ganglion cells, they are already what? So if you still, okay, I'll retain this, let's say this is a cone cell. So the retina, the ganglion cells are somewhere around here, right? So if we move back into the retina, we have other cells. All right, what are the two types of cells that allow you to see? The very basic cells that respond to light signals.
The cone cells and
Rebecca saying something?
cells, right?
Yes, cones and rod cells. So the cones and rod cells, my question was, how are they connected to the ganglion cells? The simplest answer would be they are connected via some kind of bridging cells. So let's say you cannot remember bipolar cells, but that's all right, because I told you I don't need you to memorize the exact names. I just need you to have seen the structure and roughly could remember, oh yeah, there's like the first layer that transmits the signal to the brain, and then that layer actually does the first set of processing. Now that would be the ganglion cells. And then there's some kind of a bridge in between, and then there's some kind of regulator cells in between. Then there's the cones and the rods. Remember that? I mentioned you don't have to memorize and all the rhodopsin, diopsin inside the retina, inside the cone cells, in case you read about them. No need. The rough structure is good enough. So because we are not doing physiology per se. All right. So we want to know where. So moving back to the question, we want to know how and where we first received the information. Where, easy to understand. How it's first processed. The first processing is just simply combining the red, blue, and green. And that gateway is actually done by the ganglion cells. All right. So that tells us something, that human behavior, the details of it at least, is that mostly people tell you that, oh, the behavior starts in the brain. But now you know there are certain things that begin not in your brain. All right. And what are the implications? So suppose you go back to functional roots. You say, oh yeah, but so what? This is like so component, so theoretical. You now have an extra reason to share with people why they shouldn't go blind. Now then you say, huh, blind? Yeah, blind. Blindness is not always because of what? An injury to the eye. Diseases can cause that. But the important thing is, and also emphasized in health psychology, is prevention. All right, we want health enhancement. So we want disease prevention. And disease prevention is not just about taking vaccination. Right? There are many things to do. And we, of course, if you are looking at some pathogen, yeah, then you are going into the field of medicine plenty. On the other hand, there are a lot of lifestyle causes to future diseases. So that is actually an area in health psychology, but it is not something we will look into detail. Maybe I think the last, either the last or the last second part, we will have a bit of health psychology. So psychology is no longer just limited to understanding our human behavior and period. Put a full stop there. That's it. All right. You first learn that we want to understand ourselves better from the structuralist founder, Wilhelm Wundt, also the father of psychology. Now, then he moved on, all right, not him, but the field moved on, and we are looking at how to apply these concepts. So the idea is that some people think that, well, if I'm blind, if I become visually impaired or maybe visually compromised initially, all I have to do is have corrective lenses, which most of us have. Like, you know, if I have myopia, which I have, wear specs. But there are a lot of lifestyle changes because of wearing spectacles, right? Once upon a time, it even restricts access to certain occupations. But then when like, you know, Singapore is famous for wearing specs due to myopia. At age of 17, we have 85% of our population all requiring spectacles because their degrees are at least 150 and above, right? So moral of the story is, then you find that the limits to certain occupations such as pilots, they are open to people who wear specs, because otherwise there'll be no pilots around. But just because we make compromises, that doesn't mean that our behavior will just switch back to the original. We still have to make a lot of changes, right? So that's the idea. In the applied sense, I cannot go in very lengthily about this, but the idea so far is to learn about the structures, the components, but we want to focus on the behavioral consequences. Okay, so back to the recap. We talk about visual. We also talk about hearing, right? Now, and this is even newer. So I let you watch a video that's related, and it's an introductory video, so it doesn't tell you much about hearing processes. So you actually have two videos, right? One was a very simplified one that looks cartoon in nature. It tells you how we are able to hear sounds, which also answers the question that when a sound is actually a perception. All right, so we move back all the way to answering the question: if a tree falls in the forest, but no one is there, not even an animal is around to pick up that sound, is there still a sound produced? So philosophers argue over that for hundreds of years, if not thousands. But the thing is, you just have to go back to the definition and resolve it. All right, so of course we don't know how people come up with the definitions in the past, but by modern day, some of the definitions are set. So if you look at it, right, the questions is resolved. It frees people up to do more productive things than to just sit down there and do armchair speculation or do empty argument about whether there is sound or no sound. All right, so this further implies that in the modern world, lots of things depend on clear, specific definition plus evidence. So of course, they have uncovered in physics about the vibration of air columns. So all these changes in pressure is what we are detecting, that sound, right? So we are also moving away from the dark ages of where lots and lots of people ponder over a subject and they don't make any meaningful progress because they fail to specifically define it properly, or they fail to use evidence to help their argument. And this is still a big problem. You find that some people, when they believe something, they believe so strongly, they don't want to look for evidence, and they hamper their own quality of living. One example you will learn about is that it comes, I think today or next week, it's on intelligence. A lot of people will tell you that once they grow old, they can't learn anymore, but it is not true. There are a lot of subjects that even when you are 60, 70 years old, you will still beat a teenager learning it. I'm not talking about all subjects, okay, but keep this in mind. Now, so the hearing part, the other video was that actually the whole brain lighted up. So this again resolves certain questions. It also helps you to, it debunks certain myths and helps you to avoid buying useless stuff. Like some people tell you certain sound programs where it's supposed to just stimulate the right side of the brain, and then after that you become more creative. But now you know it doesn't work that way, because when you listen to sounds, and especially when it becomes melodious music, almost the entire part of your brain, both sides, they light up. They have certain activities involved, not because they are processing the music, but you've learned before that there are different lobes, all right, and only the auditory cortex will be the one doing the processing, trying to let you understand sound and music. But the rest of the brain chipped in because they are processing the information. In other words, they are doing some form of thinking, whether you are aware of your thoughts or not, right? And we further learned that some people can become more creative by reducing, all right, inhibitory signals in the front part of their brain. And this can be achieved through practice. Like some people they've tried to relax themselves a bit before they think, which is useful because that is actually trying to mimic, all right, reducing the tension and the inhibition in the frontal lobe. But one other way, as you've watched in the video, is that people can sing and make merry while they think of a solution, right? But of course, I already mentioned that it won't work when you are starting out, because very few people have learned to sing and think about other things at the same time. You need a bit of practice. So one way to start at no cost, no real cost of time, is that you actually sing when you are taking a shower. People always thought that is just a good substitute for karaoke. But now you know you kill more than 2 birds with 1 stone, right? If you sing in the shower, whilst you go through, maybe you just think back about everyday thing while you whistle a tune. All right. So you are training your attentional resources to expand so that you can later on, right, move to the next level of what? Be very light, be very merry in your whistling or your humming or even your singing whilst you think of a solution to some problem. Okay, got it so far? So I don't profess a jump in skill just because we understand the way our brain and our mind works. There is still a progressive way to learn, all right, but enhance the learning with greater understanding of how our brain works. So we modify our behavior, all right, to have better quality of living. Got it so far? So the recap on sound, final part will be what? Now, there are 2 main components that the brain receives, all right, before it tells you that, oh, this is something melodious. The 2 basic components. What are we actually listening out for? What are the 2 things? Yoo-hoo.
Frequency and impact.
Frequency is correct. That equals the pitch, and one more?
Impact. Loudness.
Impact. Loudness, yes. It's not impact, it's amplitude. Maybe I should type it out for all of you. So we have frequency, which is in layman's term, it's called pitch of sound. And then we have the volume, or known as amplitude. Maybe I should just write loudness rather than volume. So in your chat box, these are the 2 components, right? And of course, there is another word you will learn if you read. They will talk about this word. Let me type it out for you. So whilst frequency and amplitude can be measured using an oscilloscope, all right, so you have a scientific instrument to measure frequency, to measure amplitude. This next one I'm going to introduce you to is not something that is measurable. All right. So this is timbre. Sometimes they give it a simpler word called the quality of sound or quality of music. This cannot be measured. At least not, there is no scientific instrument for it. All right. Like if you listen to classicals, you ask A may like classical and tell you, oh, this is melodious. But B may be very used to what? Grunge music. So then B wouldn't enjoy it. So timbre is more subjective, but there are still ways to ask. Usually it's more an indication of how people subjectively accept, all right, the sounds. So because of the high level of subjectivity, so it is we don't really have an instrument for it. All right. Okay, now let me share screen. The last thing is we actually ran through last week about okay, before I finish, now there is, okay, where did it go? You did a class activity. Remember, you actually watched a silent video. Then after that, you put in music, and then 1 or 2 of you, not many, actually had goosebumps while listening to the music, right? So those of you who had watched the video, you find that it also introduced you to the idea that you're not alone. When people hear something that is very touching, some touching music, right? They have goosebumps. it's not always listening to something that's touching. As long as you are the layman's term is, as long as you are musically inclined, or you are you have some acceptance of some music, it will allow you to have goosebumps. Now, this is because certain parts of your memories have been stimulated. Sorry, certain parts of your brain have been stimulated, and certain memories evoked. All right. So when you actually immerse yourself in a past experience, and when a past experience had rather deep impact on you, so you are not exactly in the scenario, all right, but the memory that is coming forth, and when it's like coming forth very quickly, you can't even pinpoint it. So your body will start to prepare itself like it's back in that situation. So in that case, right, one of the things is to have very, very subtle muscle tension. Because whenever we are in a certain situation, we will act, we will move. Unless you're trying to still your body, motionless and doing some form of special mindfulness exercises. But otherwise, most experiences we involve ourselves in, we move. For example, you want to go jogging, you have to move your legs minimum, right? If you want to go swimming, you have to move almost your entire body. Even if you say, oh, I want something very relaxing, maybe you want to eat, you have to move. So, and we are moving creatures. When we move, we start to encode the scenarios, we start to build, and meaning we integrate the experiences, and we start to build memories, right? So when your memories are being pulled out and you re-experience something, you need to move. But then remember, you are seated there enjoying the music, immersing yourself in an experience that is about moving, but you're not moving. So what your body is doing is, when it allows you to immerse yourself fully in the experience, your muscles will start to mimic like when you were moving, but you can't move, it's inhibited. Otherwise, you'll be running amok. So the sensation you feel will be what? The goosebumps, because the surface layers of the muscles will start to tense to like mimic moving, and that pulls at the hair and they will stand up. All right. So I'm not going to go further into what kind of implication this is. All right, because I think then that will be really spoon feeding you too much. There are certain positive effects from this. All right, including the re-experiencing of pleasant, all right, or sometimes a little bit intense previous experiences. So hopefully the music doesn't trigger fear. Of course, you can also use music to trigger fear. All right, that's how they do it in all these Hollywood and Hong Kong shows. So last time the movies are very silent one. Like Bruce Lee want to fight, right? You see his legs shuffling on the floor very quickly, but no sound. Until he's about to fight, then you hear the that's it. Right? But nowadays, you notice before they fight, right? Any bit of motion got some background music. But we just don't really pay attention to it. Go and rewatch. Okay, hopefully you will still focus on the movie instead of being primed by me forever. You cannot watch movie anymore because you're stuck with the background music. Okay, they play background music to invoke certain reactions from you, and certain musics, right, when they have faster beat, they have been shown to trigger certain types of experiences. So if there's something exciting going on, some like tension, they will play some fast beat, all right, repetitive rhythm, in order to make you feel with the movie. Okay, so this is enough elaboration from me. How it can be applied to you listening to music, getting a second layer of experiences, and further benefiting from music. All right, I leave you to read about it. Now let's finish up quickly. The rest are not so important. Rather, I should use the word the rest of sensation and perception, not much elaboration. It will mainly be a quick understanding of the 5 senses. All right. So we have one of the oldest evolved perception, sense of smell. Now, sense in humans, right? Actually, in a lot of vertebrates or other animals too, smell and taste, they are together. So you detect them separately. So your tongue will be the carrier of taste buds, and that's where you get the taste. Your nose, all right, will be the housing unit for certain cells. All right, we call it the olfactory cells, or olfactory bulb, which is situated at very high up your nose. So if you look at this will be my nose. When I say high up, I don't mean like at the top of the nose. Actually, it goes way even higher. Maybe somewhere in between your eyes or your eyebrow, somewhere in the front part inside. Now there's a clump of cells that grows out of your brain into the top, so that's like very high up. You will not be able to touch it because the nasal cavity is actually not a straight path. There are a lot of twists and turns inside, separated by bones, before you actually can reach there. For two reasons. One, of course, protective effect, right? You got to separate the brain out from the surrounding, but it is still touching the air. So if there's any pathogen in the air, it can still infect the brain. So the brain will, of course, have its defenses, all right, the immunity to block infection. All right, the entire brain is blocked from the outside world, except, all right, somewhere where it's near the olfactory bulb there. Okay, so there will be lots and lots of, like, okay, if you imagine like tree roots, but not the big tree root you see. Some of you might have seen before the tiny roots, all right, that extends from the big one. So especially in grass, you see those are like growth. It's very similar to somewhere up here. The other thing is there's a lot of twists and turns because when you breathe in, the air passage, right, has to take a longer route to reach. This will allow the air to warm up. So it's closer to your body's 37 degrees Celsius rather than room temperature air. And in Singapore, it's still not too bad. You usually have it at what? About 28 to 30 degrees. If it's on a hot day, maybe the actual temperature is hotter, but when the air starts to move inside, it will become what? Closer to 32. But the thing is, you want the air to be closer to 37, especially in colder places, so it does not destroy the nerves. All right. So basically, breathing, taste, and then the information is transmitted into your brain. All right. There are two sub centers that will take in the information separately: taste and then smell. And then they will send it further back to somewhere near the middle part of the brain where the information is combined. And that actually almost already implied to you why you find that food seems tasteless when you have flu. When you have flu, usually the mucus will block your nose. So you are unable to receive the full impact of signaling because whatever you smell, all right, first of all, the air, the amount of air you breathe in is limited. Air volume is limited. The rush of the air that will bring enough of the air molecules towards your nose, limited. Towards the top of your nose, where the olfactory bulb is, it's limited. So without sufficient information, when the signal sends all the way to the middle part of the brain for processing, it's insufficient. So then food becomes very bland. All right. Now, one way to do a preventive work on this is actually to do savoring. So this is the picture. All right. Like this is the nose. Of course, all the bone structures are simplified. You just see some lighter areas here. Okay. Maybe let me turn off this and make it bigger. All right. So the olfactory cells over here, they are the exposed part of the brain, and then they are sent in. All right. And yeah, if you look at, so this is taste bud. By the way, if you look at your tongue, you will see a lot of bulges. These are not the taste buds. All right. These are structures called papilla. or papillae in plural. The taste buds are actually housed. So what you see like this, right? I said, okay, let's just focus on one bump here, this bump. Can you see my mouse moving around that bump? Okay. So what you are looking at is top down. Imagine, so if you pull out this shaft, you will actually see that it's like a cylinder. So the cylinder itself, there's no whiteboard for me here. I can't draw. Even if I do, I can't draw using a mouse. So I'll just describe. It's like a cylinder. I think you can see this. So it's like this. All right. So you're looking at the top down. So if you pull it out, all right, you take it up. So it's like a column here. Now what happened is, of course, this is a hardened object and then it's nicely shaped. But in real life, what you have is there are actually holes. All right. There are holes punctuated in the column. Now, what will happen is the columns, you see all these dots and dots and dots are because the columns are not stuck together. All right. There are certain tissue growth around it. But actually, what happened is the in between columns is an empty space. It's for your saliva to, so it's for whatever you're putting on in your mouth to dissolve in the saliva. So even if you put a piece of iron, a few molecules of the iron will drift out and be dissolved in your saliva. So the saliva will then bring and wash it to the side. So remember I said there are holes around this. So the molecules will go into the hole, and that's where the taste buds are. All right. So the taste buds are housed within all these papillae. And they will merge with a molecule from the outside. And when sufficient molecules have merged, they will what? Just like your retina cells, they will send off an electrical impulse. So what you sense as taste is actually a signal, some action potential that originates on your tongue. So these two information are combined, so which is here, right? So this one shows you the tongue. It will send the signal via the glossopharyngeal nerve, right? So your eyes, there's optic nerve. Your ears, there's auditory nerve. So here we have the glossopharyngeal nerve. It will be sent along this, and then it will go and be processed at somewhere, all right, somewhere near to the, I'm not sure whether you can still remember. What do you think this piece of thing is? This whole thing starts with P. I think Stephanie was trying to mouth pons, right? I'm not sure, but I see your mouth moving.
Pons.
Yes. So the pons is the first, the one, like I said, remember I said there are some sub-centers where they collect the information. So this is like the one of the sub-center, and then it's transmitted back. So somewhere in the middle part of your brain is where the signal is combined with sense of smell. All right. So there is, of course, an olfactory nerve that will send the signal from the nose, the top of the nose all the way back. So you actually can have a fuller experience of what you are eating. All right. Of course, if it's just a smell, maybe perfume, then that's just smell. But when we savor food, we want the entire flavor that comes from smell and taste. All right. We are already devolved in a way. So but I'm sure you wouldn't mind. Like for example, in certain animals, they still retain an odor structure. So in cats and dogs, for example, they have their cavity, right? This part here. So if you look at this picture, this here you have the lips and the teeth, and then so this is the oral cavity, the mouth, and this is the nasal cavity, the nose. Now what happens is, notice if you eat something, all right, you will swallow, and even if you gulp down the food which is still piping hot, so the steam will carry the flavor, it will not go to your nose. The nose can only smell the flavor when the food is outside or moving past over at this spot. Okay. Then what happened is, this part will sense the food itself. Here you will smell the food, but they don't merge. For animals such as cats, there is actually somewhere around here, there is a hole. There is a hole connecting the nose and the mouth, meaning the nasal cavity and the oral cavity. So they literally what? Even if they smell, let's say there's shit there, right? And they smell it. So what happened is they don't have to put the shit in their mouth, but they will be able to taste it. Sounds yucky, isn't it? So that's why I said you probably wouldn't mind. We don't have this particular structure anymore. Okay. But why is it useful for animals? Is that they rely heavily on sense of smell. And they don't have to go closer to the object. What happens is now they have two senses that can get the information. All right. Because some people think about how is it, you need something to dissolve. No need. Actually, some of the molecules, right? Even when they whiff it in, it can come and it might just dissolve itself in the saliva too. And there is a different quality to it. So there are maybe hundreds of different types of molecules being given out by something, not necessarily shit. Okay, there's something out there. And some will require being dissolved in some solution before they can be detected. So in other words, right, we always need to put things in our mouth before we can detect such molecules. But the other animals, they don't need. So if these kind of molecules, they have associated to something dangerous, they will be able to know it from a very far distance. Whereas some humans wouldn't even know it, they will eat it. Then they realize they got poisoning. All right. So it is not surprising that animals and insects are better at avoiding dangerous foods such as certain mushrooms, whereas humans may not know. And when they're hungry and they are roaming, maybe they're lost in forests, they might eat something that they later will stupidly regret. Got it? So what are all this? You notice that these are guidelines to our behavior, right? Whether you react to certain emergencies ahead of time, whether you are going to exercise certain choices, it very strongly depends on the information you have. So this is not auditory, not visual information. All right, this is the gustatory, taste, and the olfactory, smell, information. Okay. So one thing you now know is that, okay, so next time when I get the flu, I'm not going to taste it as well. Well, yes. So one way out is what? Some people get frustrated. But now you realize that there is actually what? The knowledge can be made use of to reduce that frustration. In other words, people can increase their sense of acceptance. Okay? Because now they know what is wrong. It's not like they just keep blaming a disease and then they blame and blame and blame, but they understand that there are certain things. So then what to do? Of course, one way out is to try and open up the airway. So some people, they do what? Like some companies, they come up with ointment, for example, Vicks. So they have some of these things that open your nasal airway when it's blocked. But the idea is, if you keep using it, right, very soon the power is not there. But if you just keep it to certain times, all right, like before meal times, you open up, and after that you open up the airway, but you don't do it like immediately in front of the food, but maybe 5-10 minutes beforehand, so that the airway opens, and then after that, right, those peppermint ointment, the smell has faded. So that would still allow you to have more quality in enjoying food. So this example illustrates what? That we again make use of such knowledge, such information, to adjust ourselves behaviorally speaking. Okay. So if you notice by now, there is always another theme running. Whilst you're learning all this, we are also discussing about how behavior can be made to improve using all this information. All right. Now then there is what? Sense of touch. The sense of touch, there are actually only 4 types of sensors underneath your skin for sense of touch, and it has nothing to do with each. There is, so I tell you what, you can refer to from here, right? This, okay, I will just sum it all up. There are only 4 types of basic sensation. So your so-called sense of touch, right? It's the basic components are whether there is light touch. All right, light touch. Then there's pain. Then there's hot, as in high temperatures, and there's cold. In the real world, actually, there's no such thing as cold. Okay, so if someone asks you a question, let's say the question is like the sound question. No, if a tree falls in the forest, blah 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 blah. So let's say someone is imaginative and they try to push you and they say that, suppose Harry Potter is real, they cast a spell onto your cell phone and your cell phone becomes alive. But when you pour hot water over your cell phone, would it be able to feel heat? Answer is no, because it lacks the sensors. Now, but heat is still easily understood. So the question then changes to, but what about cold? If you put it into the refrigerator, would it be able to sense cold? All right. Again, the answer is no. Because that is even more straightforward. Because then if you ask a physicist, the physicist will tell you there's no such thing as cold. Cold is really a loss of heat. So in real world, right, we know that the heat and cold depends on energy. So if there is accumulation of a certain type of energy, there is heat. If there is loss of that kind of energy, it is supposed to be just loss of heat. There's no such thing as cold. But in order to be better, to be better equipped to survive, many animals, including humans, have evolved a particular receptor underneath the skin to detect the loss of heat. So now we have 2 sensations. We can feel heat and we can feel coldness, sorry. Okay. My video is off. I didn't even realize. Oh, shucks. Something wrong with the video. I've just turned it on, but I do not know why it's a blank thing there. It's very annoying. I'll adjust later. Okay, you don't have to count the number of pimples I have on my face to pass your exam anyway. So let's continue. Okay, so 4 things you will feel. All right, then people start to ask the question, then what about itch? Actually, we have no idea what itch is. Until today, right, we still can't figure out what exactly is itch. There are situations where we realize people itch because of a little bit of damage to the skin or to the tissue underneath the skin. And we notice that itch will come when there is excessive inflammation, but it doesn't happen all the time. So what people know now is that very, very minor kind of damage to the tissue, inflammation, and sometimes prior to the inflammation, certain kinds of infection, it will cause itch. But so far, we failed to isolate the specific receptor for itch. So there are some hypotheses that suggest that maybe there is no such receptor. It is just our pain receptors, but a small number has fired off rather than a large number of them. Okay, and this is actually not original, not new. You find that in ancient medical practices like traditional Chinese medicine, the Ayurvedic medicine, all this, right? they already hypothesized it, that each is actually a very mild kind of pain, and that is not good, right? And they even have, because in ancient past, people are quite religious. Sometimes they incorporate such ideas. So they tell you that if you itch a lot and you get distracted, that's no good. So they developed mindfulness exercises to ignore the itch for certain religious practices even. Okay, because they assume that the damage is not strong enough that you need to escape. So it's a form of distraction. All right, and if you do something like scratching it, you may be easing yourself, but you are actually causing some kind of spiritual damage. So there are this kind of non-evidence stuff floating around. All right, I'm not referring to all this. All I want to say is it has been noticed since time immemorial, but until today we still cannot isolate the exact thing behind each. All right. Okay. So that's why there are only these four senses: sense of pain, sense of touch. The touch is in terms of light pressure or vibrational kind of feeling. All right. Then there's hotness and there's coldness. Now, there's something interesting that I like to show you. What if people lose their limbs? Can they still feel sensation, maybe even pain in the lost limb? So this, let's switch to I'm showing you this video because I want to show you how much the brain and the body is really connected. We are going to we're going to watch a condition known as phantom limb. Okay, phantom limb pain occurs when people have lost a limb, but they still feel the pain there. Right, listen to this before I highlight to you, right, how surgeons, specifically neurosurgeons, how they go in to resolve this problem in the past. But there are also other ways. But watch the other ways first.
It's a pain people with amputations may feel in an invisible limb, but Dr. David Burbrayer, a physiatrist at Sunnybrook, explains phantom pain is very much real.
The phantom pain is coming from the brain. It's a
physiatrist. Oh wait, I think I haven't shared, have I?
Mr. Lam, we can't see the video.
Can see now?
Yes.
Okay, anyway, the physiatrist is actually there are, as you know, there are different specialist doctor. So a doctor specializing in rehabilitation medicine is a physiatrist.
It's a pain people with amputations may feel in an invisible limb, but Dr. David Burbrayer, a physiatrist at Sunnybrook, explains phantom pain is very much real.
The phantom pain is coming from the brain. It's a perceived impression, what we call an engram. The brain has a picture of your residual limb that's absent.
Bruce Tompkins lost his leg when an infection settled into his bones and he developed an advanced stage of localized osteoporosis.
I was actually walking on 6 broken bones when it was finally diagnosed, and I only had really 2 choices: to live with the amount of pain that I was living in and not walk normal, or lose the limb and start a new life with a prosthetic, and I chose the latter, of course. There was a month at least where I went through a mental crisis saying, how can a leg that I don't even have cause this kind of pain, you know? The phantom pain that I get daily, which I still get, is just kind of a tingling and a numbing. It just allows you to realize that feels like your limb is still there. But the severe phantom pain, I can only describe it as your foot being in a bucket of water with piranhas in it, or hot coals. It gets so debilitating that I've actually huddled into a corner and just cried myself to sleep because it just won't go away.
So how can you treat pain in a limb that doesn't exist? Experts say with a mirror and an open mind.
Mirror therapy is using a mirror between the limbs in order to allow the brain to think that the intact limb is the absent limb, and then allow a professional to treat the intact limb as if it were the absent limb.
And go.
If, for example, the toes are curled up and on the absent limb, as the patient perceives it, if they could move the toes on the intact limb and move it up and down, the brain will tell the individual that the toes on the amputated limb is now moving, and that will allow less pain and less discomfort in the residual limb. That's an example, and it works. It's effective in terms of treating pain.
And I had a full-blown attack on the Saturday night there. You know, one of the ones that would have made me medicate myself and just curl up and just pray that it would go away. And about 20 minutes using the mirrors, it was completely gone. And
Okay, so the brain and the body connection is very, very strong. It doesn't mean that just because a person has a sudden loss of limb, and then the brain suddenly realizes, okay, I'm following through the current history of your life. It doesn't work that way. So once upon a time, they thought that it's because of remnant nerve. So for example, if you look at the man's stub here, they thought that it was because what? There were nerves connected to this leg, but now that it's been amputated, the nerve here has not died, and it's receiving signal, or at least it's producing signal saying that there is a tremendous hurt here, because after all, you've lost the limb. So the nerve is correct to say that, hey, something, it has chopped your leg, something has invaded, all right, the tissues around here, not knowing that it's already removed for the sake of maybe saving the person's life. Now, this can be treated too, of course. So there are actually more than one way of treatment. All right, the costlier one sometimes is necessary, because it doesn't mean that just because they show you this video, it works all the time. So what happened is sometimes we have remnant nerves still firing away. So then these people are scheduled for a second surgery where they will ablate, meaning they will use high heat to destroy the nerve endings over here. And therefore, the nerves will no longer produce unnecessary signaling. Well, on the other hand, of course, that is an invasive and costly procedure. On the other hand, you have, for example, here, mirroring. So mirroring, all right, you've seen how it's like. Now, the idea is to teach the brain to separate the signal. That there is one leg here, and then there's the other leg over there. Okay, that you can still establish some control. So in this case, this gentleman, it worked very well. That's why he said that, you know, he had to be on medication, he had to cry himself to sleep. But after starting this, like one session, 20 minutes, and it's over. It's gone. His brain has learned to reset the information. Okay. So let me switch back. Just a moment. The screens are out of the windows are out of alignment. Okay, so now the last part will be what? Of course, this whole thing, right? Phantom limb is just for you to realize how strongly the brain and the body is connected. All right. I, of course, don't need you to fully understand how the treatment is done. And then there's pain. But when people learn this, usually this slide is actually not so important. The only function is that After people learn that, oh, so we have nerve endings in the skin that tells us about pain. Therefore, pain seems to be like a visual signal. So travels along the nerve, goes to the brain, and then down. We know the signal. We know the experience. It's not like that. Pain is a very special kind of signal. Because think about it. It tells us about danger, usually like damage to our body, correct? But most people, when they experience strong pain, they will want to stop moving because they don't want to aggravate the area, correct? But what about our primitive ancestors? In a world that was very, very harsh, can they really stop just because they feel pain? Now they can't, because they could lose their lives, right? And we would be extinct. Sometimes they have to bear with the pain to try and escape predation. So we have evolved different mechanisms for this. This doesn't just work from there's an injury to your body and then the signal travels from the injured side all the way to your brain. No. What happened is there are certain things that can be done to mitigate pain. And because pain doesn't just reach the brain straight, unlike your visual signals, auditory signals, right? The rest of the signals, the rest of your body will, wherever there's injury or there's damage, it will send a signal, but it will send to the spinal cord first. And it doesn't even enter the spinal cord. It actually connects to just outside the spinal cord where there's a clump called ganglion. So now let's look at this word again. So you find that, why are you telling me this word again? I thought we are not talking about the eyes. Ganglion cells are like the first layer of thinking cells. They process information. It need not be restricted only to the inside of the eye. There are actually various ganglion cells in different parts of your body. And when they cluster together, they are called what? A ganglion node, N-O-D-E. Now, some of you may have learned before that there's something called spinal root. What's that? So your spinal column are actually about 33 pieces of bones. And in between, right, there are gaps. So just outside of such gaps, right, actually it's on the inside. Outside, I mean outside of the central spinal cord. But just beyond the spinal cord, there are clumps and clumps along the 32 gaps. The 33 gaps, and then they all have like a thickened knot of nerves before they extend finally to other parts of the body. So just beside your central spinal column, all right, there are the central part of your spinal cord. There are all these clumps of things. They are also ganglion. So the pain signal will first reach the ganglion cells, and then the ganglion cell will then consider whether to send forth to your brain. It won't send forth, for example, if you are under stress, or it will reduce the signaling. Now this makes sense. It comes from ancient mechanism. Ancient people don't have much stress except survival stress. And for them, dying is a very, very real thing. Very, very convenient thing too. Easily you will die. So death can come from many ways, and predation, of course, is very common in the primitive days. Or because the world is not safe and then they don't have like foot gear and all this, so they can hurt themselves very easily. So when that happens, all this will cause pain. But then the need to escape will cause them to be stressed out. So eventually, right, the body evolves so that it produces certain chemicals to suppress the pain signal. So the pain is actually a signal from a damaged part of the body. It moves all the way to the spinal cord, but just before it can stimulate the spinal cord to send the signal to the brain, it will there might be certain chemicals released so that the pain signal is arrested at the spinal root. Okay. Now, in that case, think about this. if let's say you are injured and yet you are, the pain that you feel is much less, wouldn't you be able to go further? And that actually can be pros and cons. Some people, they have some chronic problems, or they have a chronic injury, they feel the pain. Now, one way out is to what? Is to undergo rehab, all right? Rehab therapy, rehab exercises, but it takes time to work. So to cope with the pain, right, what can you do? Some people learn mindfulness meditation, where they keep training to get their mind off focusing on the pain, right? So that works. Another lot, you find that some people, they tend to do something more stressful, but it's a nicer kind of stress, like maybe exercise. So they may feel, of course, you don't exercise wrongly. The positioning, the posture is off. Of course, you aggravate the pain. But what some people do is that they tell you, oh, I just go for a run to ignore the pain. Actually, they run for quite a long distance. So they subject the body to a form of challenging stress, running longer distances. I mean, if your injury is in your foot, of course you don't run. That's silly. You just aggravate the injury. So some people choose to what? To swim. But the point is, if you put yourself in a something what we call, let me type it out for you. So what you've learned about the word stress, right, is actually so generally we say, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed. We are actually talking about distress, the bad side, like you are being bogged down by life pressures. There is actually a good kind of stress, like when you feel somewhat challenged by a task, but you know you will overcome it eventually. You just need to figure out the way, and you are very confident that you will figure it out soon. All right? How many of you have never been through this kind of situation? Like your whole life is a disaster. There is only distress. Very sad, right? Then you need to see me, isn't it? But conflict of interest, so I cannot see you. I'll just make a referral, okay? Now, so I'm talking about challenging. I think you will get the idea now. So there are some times where we feel challenged, but it's like kind of exciting. That's eustress. If you go for, so suppose, right, you are not a seasoned runner, then of course you don't go and suddenly just run 10 kilometers. Okay. And I'm assuming the pain is not from your, let's say, your hip or your knee. You might want to what? So let's say you got injured at work. The injury is on your thumb. So it's nothing to do with your leg. So you decided that, wow, so boring, I stay at home. Okay, I'm going out. So you decide to go for a longish kind of stroll every day. You walk, all right, to the park, go one round around the park and come home. That's 10 kilometers. Now that's a long distance to walk for a normal person, but walking still okay. And maybe you decide that initially you will sit a bit, all right, maybe say every 2 kilometers. So in other words, right, you are creating a kind of stress on your body, isn't it? And some people thought that it's because they go for the walk, they got distracted, but it's not. That works too. At the same time, when you are not used to walking and you just walk such a long distance, but you feel that if you take sufficient breaks, you will feel tired, but you will finish the walk now. That is actually eustress. Stress will release, there are actually something called stress hormones. Some of you are familiar with it. The most general type is actually cortisol. So the cortisol hormone actually goes to the usually at the spinal root, and when it's there, it will block the pain signal. So now we have more information. So whenever people are in pain, we no longer tell them just rest. All right, we tell people to do moderate amounts of exercises. We teach people to do certain other things. We encourage them to do certain other things, like maybe what? Pack up the room. Don't just wait until you are fully recovered, but do it at a pace that you can cope with. So there's plenty of things to do to achieve eustress, the good kind of stress. So the stress releases cortisol. but you interpret the stress as good, so that gives you joy. Plus the stress itself will subdue the pain, so then you can do more. All right, of course, you just learn the objective of this. In therapy, we will then talk more lengthily about how the client can generate activities of eustress, various types, different activities, so that they don't run dry or become bored with just one of them. Then you will lose its usefulness. Okay, so you are not my patients. All right, but I'm with the knowledge. So next time, if you feel something painful, don't aggravate it, of course. And beyond that, once you are able to protect it from worsening, the next thing is, how do you improve your quality of living? Okay, give yourself some stress. It doesn't sound good right now. But now you know what I mean. Okay, all right. And of course, people also try to what? Nowadays, they try to stimulate their certain nervous point in order to achieve reduction in pain and also some other things. Of course, the Chinese have another language for this. They will tell you the very strange things about there's qi, right? Of course, if you directly translate it, it means air, but that's because 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, they cannot understand electricity, they cannot understand energy. So there's no word for it. So at the time, they thought that it's a kind of air moving inside your body. But what is really happening in acupuncture is that the needles, they actually touch certain nervous points, nerves. And by rotating the needle, so you insert the needle touches the nerve. There are different types of nerves. It's not just like you touch the one part of the nerve is great. So it touches a certain nerve, and when you twist and turn the needle, it will stimulate the nerve. So depending on where they poke you, it will either end up releasing certain chemicals, like you've learned before, endorphins, which is a natural painkiller in your body. All right, or they will force the nerve to fire or inhibit it, so that it will then manipulate, for example, maybe the muscles, making the muscles relax more, or it inhibits the muscle for a period of usually between half a week to a week, so that you find that you will have more control over your problematic limb, something along that line. Okay, so acupuncture is not about the skin, it's really about the nerves. Then you say that, how come there's acupoint? All right, because these are locations where the way the muscle are layered, sometimes there's crisscross of two different pieces of muscle. So at the crisscrossing point, there is the nerve underneath, it's more easily reached. Or there are certain parts where the nerve has to run near to the surface, so they are pretty much exposed, therefore your needle can reach. So acupoints are merely areas of the body where the nerves are in a position where we can easily reach them by inserting a needle. You don't have to poke layers and layers of muscles just to reach the nerve. That will cause damage. Got it? Okay, so nothing mystical about this. The language itself is mystical because it was invented, it was discovered and later refined, all right, for the last 4,000 to 5,000 years. And then in those days when people don't understand, that's why you have all these funny languages. I mean, those of you who have heard about all the Chinese names to this, they will tell you that there's the cold wind, the chill wind, the wet wind, or the dampness stuck inside the body. These are just analogous words. All right, or then the most obvious will be stroke. Nowadays we know stroke occurs because you have either blockage of blood vessel blockage, or blood vessel burst, meaning somehow blood is causing problem to your nervous system, your brain. But in the past, right, Chinese call stroke you got hit by wind. All right, so it's all because they didn't understand anatomy and physiology, so they came up with very common words to their days to label all these things. So to most people, it's like, it's kind of easily misunderstood. all right, until you've learned the language. So here I dispel certain myths. For people who don't understand why certain things work underneath the skin, like itchiness is something we still don't understand, but you should pay attention to it. Not, especially in the recurring itch, it should not be ignored. Then we learn about what? We demystify all these things, but it's actually the nerves. And you realize that the brain and body are more intricately connected, right? Through the phantom limb example. So last bit will be what? Balance. I think 2 weeks ago, someone asked the question, and I mentioned that or rather 3 weeks ago, there are a few parts to this. First of all, inside your head, you've already learned it. Something inside the ear, the inner ear, is an organ that has at least a 2-in-1 purpose. Now, can you still remember the part of the ear that is helping you to balance? All right. Yeah, it's called the semicircular canals, right? So this 3 rings, they are dealing with balance, but they are and orientation, but they are actually regulating the way you understand direction, positioning, mainly of how your head is positioned with reference to the body. Okay, so you still need to know the rest of your body. So the rest of the body, right, we have these receptors or proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are housed within your joints. So as you move your joints, okay, these kind of things will then pick up the movement, the vibration, and know how each of your limb is with reference to another limb. So overall, your body will then make use of this information to calculate and send off signals to your muscles to regulate your movement so you don't topple over. But that's not all to balancing. All right. So your muscles, when they are stretched, when they are relaxed, they also send off signals. So there are certain receptors known as what? Spindles, muscle spindles. Do I need you to remember muscle spindles? No. But I like you to remember that there are such things called proprioceptors. All right. Like now, of course, you don't just learn that the eyes help you to see. You know that it's because of what? More specific things like the cone cells and the rod cells, all right, allow you to see brightness and colors. So what about balance? Balance comes from, well, proprioceptors tells you how your body is oriented. When you lose this ability, you won't have the information required to calculate how to balance. That doesn't mean you cannot balance. You still can. You can rely on visual input, for example, because more than one part of the brain is involved in balancing. All right, other than knowing how the body is positioned, oriented, it will try to confirm the position through looking at things. So if you still have eyes, of course, what about blind people? So blind people, even if you tell them you give them a big open space and you tell them to run, they will run. They can never reach the maximum speed of running because the balancing becomes compromised. So at most, they will maybe just jog. Okay, let's take a look at what happens when you fully lose your ability in proprioception.
Proprioceptive, never even heard of it, so you know how I lost it, I don't know. The complete, well, hey, what's that? Very scary stuff. I was working in Jersey about 30 years ago as a butcher. Got what I thought was flu, and gradually got weaker and weaker and weaker, and was eventually taken into hospital. and woke up the following morning with no ability to control movement. I still had movement, and I could move an arm and I could move a leg, but I had no very fine control over that. The consequences were that I couldn't control my body.
Meaning, in the beginning, he was really just jerking left, right, center. The left, right, center is not like literally left, right, center. I'm saying it in a Singlish sense. Okay, where he tried to move, because there he can't feel it, he may be either over pulling a limb movement, or he might move so slowly and gently that it doesn't help him maintain balance. So initially, he's a person who's like slumped in bed, cannot control his limbs, all right, properly.
And position sense, so that if he doesn't look at an arm, he doesn't know where it is.
When you stand and when you dance, you don't necessarily think about where exactly am I in time and space. I have to think about all the processes that go on behind that, developing the movement. Am I safe? Am I in the right position?
And then slowly he realised that if he looked at a moving part and then thought and willed it to move, he could control that movement.
Again, showing you the
An awful long time to learn.
link between the brain and the body, right? So for us, we've taken it for granted, but this guy, he will have to rely on other sensation, like such as vision, in order to control himself. But notice the word used was he has to will it. So he has to look at it, then he has to what? Automatically put some effort into making it move.
Just to stand. And I even say that today, one of the toughest things that I have to do is to stand perfectly still. It was very, very difficult to learn the concept that if you put an arm out, you'd go that way. That's what things do. So I had to lean slightly that way. And they tried to use mirrors, which you use as a dancing field. And I tried that, but I just couldn't work it all together quickly enough in my head. So I very quickly gave up the mirrors and just concentrated on looking down, which is why I walk in the way that I do, which is inclined forward and looking down, so I can catch my whole body, so I can monitor and control and look at what's happening.
You're literally dependent on being able to see your foot so that you know it's done the right thing.
When you're walking down the road, you don't think about every step that you're taking. I do, otherwise I lose touch with where things are. And when we were walking over the Millennium Bridge earlier, I had to stop and admire the view rather than just sort of like glance up as I was walking along, because to have glanced up would have taken the feedback that I require away.
So if you close your eyes,
if I was to close my eyes, I'd stay in this position. That's quite an easy thing to do, but freeze certain muscles and freeze into a posture. But if we go back the 25 years or so when I was first disabled, if I was to close my eyes for more than a few seconds, I'd fall over. I hadn't learned these strategies of freezing the tummy muscles.
I think I'm understanding what you physically have to go through, but what is the neurological explanation for what Ian's going through?
There are peripheral nerves that go to the skin, go to the muscles, go to the joints. And some of those are movement nerves, so when they fire, bits of you move, and some are sensation nerves. In Ian, he had an infection, and he raised an antibody which actually attacked the nerve cells and wiped them out. Just the sensory nerves conveying touch, movement and position sense.
So you can send messages to your body in exactly the same way as me,
Yeah.
but you don't get the message back which tells you what you've done.
Yeah, I don't get the acknowledgement saying, yeah, that's right, you got it right, you'll now move on to the next stage.
Okay. So, question? So let's sum it up. All right. Okay, maybe I should do this. So just now I was talking about this now, and this part. All right, we had a recap about the ear. So for balance, there is, so this is vestibular system is for balance. The vestibular system is actually very huge. All right, it's almost as if there are too many parts of the brain involved, so there is not like a very specific picture. You have your cerebellum involved, you have a lot of your parietal lobe involved, you have, of course, your receiving signal, but this is only about head orientation. And then almost, if you look at all the joints in your body and the muscles, so it's not going to be like a picture that looks like what you've learned, like this, very specific pathways. This is huge. This is like they just have to draw your human entire body. So there's no simplified picture like this. Vestibular system is very high, but a lot of them, the signal will connect somewhere at around this portion of the brain. Okay, but of course this is 2 dimensions, so it's not that clear. That's why there is no like one specific location. Balancing is a big deal for the brain. It's almost as if the entire brain, all right, the majority of the brain evolved basically to make sure that you move efficiently, and balancing is part of that, right? So what we have is that this chapter, it tells you about it. First of all, it debunks what we've all learned in our primary school, that we have 5 senses. We know we have more than 5 basic senses, depending on which kind of definition you are going for, but it's between 9 to 20 basic senses. And you've learned that there are certain senses that make it possible for us to begin the information processing process, right? So thinking is not always about already generating thoughts. It is also about making sense of the information we receive. And you find that not only were you shown, all right, how information is used, but what can happen to human behavior when we are no longer able to sense and perceive some of this information. Like, for example, the phantom limb, the man with the last part you just saw, with who no longer has any proprioception. All right, and then earlier on we also saw that there could be people with color blindness. All right, so all these things will warp the way we try to understand the world and the way we interact with the world as well as other people, right? So this whole chapter, remember, it's all about the way we behave, all right, when we first get hit by environmental information. Now, let's go for a break. I see you at 8:50. Then we'll breeze through the next chapter, okay? Let's finish with the thinking processes. Now, we have lingered a bit on sensation and perception. The rest of the thinking processes will include attention, memory, language, and thought. All right. So basically, we are actually doing cognitive psychology. Okay, so since we started on sensation and perception, we are looking at the topic called cognitive psych. And these are the components involved. Sometimes you don't see certain parts in cognitive psychology, like intelligence, because it's shared heavily by other subdisciplines. Like developmental psychology has a lot to say about intelligence. All right, and then educational psychology too. Okay, so if you want to think about it, it's like the root. All right, the root is cognitive psych, because it churns out all the bits and pieces, the components, the understanding, and then the applied portions of psychology, such as developmental psych, which deals with how people grow up, the different stages of growing up, what they do, and educational side, so people learn about how to learn, so they will make use of this information. Now, so that's what I'm talking about. In fact, the applications are wider than just within psychology. Outside of psychology, even in the, so educational side is educational side. Can you hear me? Oh shit. You can hear me, but I notice my image is not
Yeah, we
moving.
can hear you, but we can't see you. But we can see the screen.
Can't see.
We can see the screen, but
said-
from the previous chapter. Have we changed the chapter yet?
Yeah, wait. There's a signal that says my internet is unstable. Just a moment. But it looks like the video is still bad.
Okay.
When you say you cannot see me, is it just what I can see of myself is that I have a frozen image? What about
yes,
what?
so your image is black currently. On screen, we see why study cognitive psychology.
Yeah, okay. Maybe
you
turn
want to
the
switch off your
for a while.
video? Yeah.
Yeah, it's off now. Yeah, I fixed it when just before the break. And oh yeah, yes, Kai, I did. I restarted the
Yeah, no,
No, the
actually we
com-
saw you for a while when you came back, then it froze.
Yeah. Okay, never mind. I said you don't need to count pimples on my face. So that's, if there's any more problem, just voice it out, because I may not be able to see. I will keep my, let's off my video for a while. Okay, we continue first without wasting more time. So basically, as I was saying, psychology, it provides information, and it's used not only within the field itself, but beyond. So educational psychology is different from education. Education has also a focus on learning about what should be included as syllabus, right, or content for studying. Now, educational psychology only deals with how people can learn more effectively and efficiently. And the people is not limited to people who are considered normal, people who have super intelligence, or who have subnormal intelligence will also be included. So there are ways to help people pick up information. That's the difference. So the list here that you see are actually what? Are the views. Just now, before you saw, I think it should be this. Okay, I said we are starting on cognitive psychology, and it is made up of by these things. All right. Now let's look at what happens after sensation perception. So the moment you receive the energy stimulus from external world, or maybe inside your body, like maybe from your stomach, so then your first instant is that the ganglion cells will try to make sense of them. So we start to organize them, and your conscious mind will begin the processing. To do that, it must first, if I may use an analogy, you must first shine a spotlight on the thing you want to focus on. Otherwise, there's so much to see. All right. But we are groping almost like in the dark. We want to shine a spotlight. That spotlight, the technical term is actually attention. Initially, this guy called Broadbent, when psychology became more modernized, he was the first to look into attention. But he got it wrong. So originally, he proposed the fact that we humans have some kind of a filter. Of course, he never showed this biologically speaking, because in those days, right, 1950s, we don't have the technology anyway. But behavioral experimentation show that there seems to be a filter. And this is not difficult to understand. Think about it. When you are in a party, okay, So let's say we have you seated. So you are in a round table. Okay, let's say there's a dinner party. So first we have you seated there. Then there's A next to you, and then next to A is B. Now, but on the other side, right? So on one side is U, A, followed by B. Then another side is X and Y. So the whole table, just imagine a part of it. The sitting arrangement is there's Y, there's X, there's U, then there's A, and then there's B. Okay. Now you may be talking to A. So if we were to visualize it, it might look something like this in your chat. So we have so you might be talking to A about some things about work, all right? After all, you know, there's common topic. Then you heard Y whispering to X because you're seated nearby, right? You could hear Y is trying to tell you who the boss is having an affair with. Wow, sounds like those TV shows, right? Now, my question to you is very simple. Will your attention be more on A or be more on Y, what Y is whispering about? You can hear Y, A cannot, okay? Okay, because Y is facing X. And then, of course, you know, facing your direction means you can hear the whisper. A is too far away. X doesn't know that you are eavesdropping. Aha, that's the best part, right? Okay. But the question still is, will your attention be on Y's topic, or you still happily, you know, very engaged with A? Anyone can answer this, huh? We don't need to put it to a vote. Actually, we should. Why? Why are you like that? Oh my God. But that's normal, okay? I was just pulling your leg. I don't know who answered. I heard the sound. It is normal. Who the boss is having an affair is like way more juicy than let's talk about work with A, correct? But here's the thing. I'd like you to imagine yourself in the scene. Would you just suddenly shut off from A? Maybe, shucks, I can't show my face. Yeah, maybe I can. Let's try again. Okay, we don't need to try again. I can't even turn on my camera now for some reason. Okay, I'm not gonna try it later. The thing hangs. Okay, I'll check it out again when the class is over. Anyway, so will you stare blankly at A like you are talking, but you are like just now, like Mr. Lam's image frozen? Or will you continue to like interact politely with A in a superficial way, of course, but you really, really would love to talk to Y and ask why the boss is like that? Now, looking at some of you smiling, we know it should be why, right? As in, we will pay attention to why. We'd love to talk to why, we just can't, but we will superficially attend to A still, correct? Jiahui, are you trying to? No, Jiahui is talking to somebody else. Never mind. I thought she's trying to distract something. Anyway, I think most of us will opt for that, right? We will still politely attend to A, although we probably don't really pay attention to. And in fact, suddenly we hear A ask us something. Hey, you know, should I use protocol 1 or protocol 2, which is a protocol at work? Now, are you going to become dumbfounded? Because you just happen, if you look at the screen, you just happen to have filtered away all the talk just before protocol 1 and protocol 2. How many will end up like that? Okay, I raise all my hands all the hands that I have. You too, huh? Okay. So that's actually what Broadbent found out. He found that by exposing his participants, right, to various topics, and he found that somehow they don't pay attention to one particular source all the time. They pay attention, but to the selected source. They don't pay attention to all the sources. That's more accurate in describing it. So eventually he developed this model. He said that, your sensation and perception, all right, but it's impossible that, just from here we jump to filtering out the information, because we got to make sure that, because when they ask, right, people are able to say things like, oh yeah, I let's say when you return home and your significant other asks you, hey, so how was it at the party? You start to say, oh yeah, I was so like bad luck. I was put to sit beside A, and knowing how stoned this person was, I just had to talk about work, blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you something juicy. So you see, if you have memory of some of the things, it can't be like, you straight away just filter out some of the information. It must have come true. But maybe you won't store for long. So then based on this, it should make sense. You start to filter out something. So you find that you can't answer A very well. All right, because your attention is all allowing only one bit of information, which is the boss affair from the as told by Y. True. Any question about this model? Simple, isn't it? All right, so this is just a simple way to explain what Broadbent found out. I'm sure you don't want to read through pages and pages of his scientific exploration and his testing, okay? So this is just a simple model, and he's suggesting that what? Now, of all the information that comes, all right, sensation, perception, you learned this already. We will allow all of them to go through, but in a modified way. Not surprising, you've also learned that because it's all electrical signal inside your brain. And of course, for the filter to work, all the information must be processed, but only some will go through. Okay. Now, however, if this happens, right, there is a flaw. Now, suppose, right, you didn't really pay attention to A, but later on, right, have you experienced this before? Although you didn't pay attention to someone, but later on, right, when you recap everything to someone else, or you're trying to recall what was said so that you can do something or make your decision, you realize that you can still go ahead and do it. And you somehow were able to still make use of information that you thought you didn't hear it, but it's there. And it's not because you learn it by yourself in another occasion. It's literally from A. Have you experienced that before? Yeah, some of you are nodding your heads, right? So yes. So then this is impossible. How can a filter allow some information to pass through, and yet in the end, when you truly are making decisions like way beyond this slide now, all right, you are making use of more than one arrow. So in this case, right, 3 are filtered out, only 1 went through, but the decision making was based on, let's say, 2 or 3 arrows. So obviously there's something wrong with this. It doesn't account for real life. So 1 or 2 years later, there's this woman who later became very famous. All right, Anne Treisman. So Treisman, she experimented and more accurately defined it, showing that the filter, right, is not literally like the physical world, a real physical filter. What it does is, it does omit certain information, but it's based on the meaning of the information and the meaningfulness of the information, which resulting in what? It is only a weakening of the information that comes through. It is not a block of some information. So you still have like this amount of information coming, it's converted to another mode, but notice that all the information will still go through, except some information that are deemed not so important. That's the dotted line. They are weakened. You don't pay attention to all the details. This actually describes us better, isn't it?
Mr. Lam, can we say that basically it's a selection process? Like it selects what's important and what's not important?
Yes, but that's the thing that they are trying to argue out. See, all along, right, we commonsensically know that attention is about filtering, is about selection. Then what happened was Broadbent came to the picture first. He thought that the selection actually killed some of the information, literally eliminate some of the information. What Treisman experimented and then showed that there was a misinterpretation by Broadbent. There is, of course, selection, but we select to allow that important information come true totally, but we didn't kill off the unselected information, meaning the information that was not selected wasn't killed off. We simply drop off some of its details. So what you said was correct, Stephanie. What Broadbent and Treisman were doing was simply elaborating what that selection process was all about. Because at that time, right, in the 50s, people were starting to want to use science, use concrete things to describe all these observations about ourselves. So they got to the part where, oh, it's a selection process. So then these two fellows then said, well, so let's elaborate on that selection process. So Broadbent was corrected. Now this has implication. Think about it. If this model, right, Broadbent's model is true, can you incriminate all the criminals? And if versus this one. Now someone would plead guilty and say, well, I'm wrong because I didn't pay attention. Let's say someone following this, right, will plead, well, it's my fault, I didn't pay attention, but then that is how I was born with. You see, the moment we don't, all humans are like that, we don't pay attention, so that's it, some of the information are lost. But here, a criminal will say, well, it's not my fault. But you can then shoot another question. Why did you just weaken the important information? It's not that it's not there, you know, it's there. Now maybe this is too abstract. Let's look at the latest person who got incriminated. I'm meeting recently out in the papers, right? This last 2-3 days, there's this guy who was caught 2 years ago killing his wife and daughter. All right, he murdered them. So he pleaded guilty to depression, not the actual murder charge. So he's trying to have the first degree murder become what? Become not first degree, but instead, right, it was done because he was under the influence of mental health illness, depression specifically, major depression. Now, but then notice that the judge and the investigators, right, say that, but there are certain things, like after he killed the people, he actually hid the bodies for up to a period of 9 days. Right? So if there was really depression and blocking out some of the information, how would he be able to plan when there is insufficient information, insufficient understanding of the consequences? But he was planning to get away. Right? Except he didn't plan enough. That's why there were loopholes and he was caught. Notice the implication now. All right. We don't block out all the information totally. Here we just weaken them. But then here comes the question. Then people ask, why do you weaken some of the information? All right. So let's put it to normal people. For some children, they say that, yeah, my child, you know, you might have heard parents say before, oh, my child is easily distracted. Yeah. But why is your child selecting certain information, certain key or important information to block out, and which resulted in poorer results? Why not block out some other non-essential information and emphasize on the important one, which will then lead to improved results? Now, if you think about it, right, this is very powerful, because once upon a time, people thought that children who couldn't perform better than other children. So let's look at all the children with poorer performance in school. They are just plain not so smart. But it's not true. What if the child had learned to pay attention on the wrong things? So they are still letting things through, but they selectively block out the important things. Now, this means that the process can be reversed, right? Because the information is there. They just have to choose to block out the non-essential ones. Whereas If the filter is automatic and it blocks out some of the information, then there's no hope. There's nothing else there. Okay. So luckily, this, of course, is not so correct. Actually, what happened is all humans allow things to come. But here is another problem. Then you find that people tell you, oh, you don't really forget things. You know, whatever you've seen before will go through. Everything in. Just that you don't pay attention to some of them. Now, that is another extreme. Okay, so let's avoid the extreme. What is really happening is we do weaken certain information. Of course, if it gets in the way of your life, you can be trained to pay attention to the correct information. Okay, sometimes through simply giving the correct reward. So let's say the bottom arrow is the correct thing. Then what happens is you're teaching your child to pay more attention to the bottom arrow, whatever the bottom arrow represents. So after studying, let's say studying some things, you start to ask the child questions, and the child is able to answer you maybe initially right, wrong. The not so important things the child keep repeating. So you start to play a game and make the child focus more on the other kind of info. So later on, when the child starts to say, okay, I remember both the middle arrow information and the bottom arrow information. So what the parents could do would be what? Repeat that. Yes, this time now you remember a bit more information, which is the bottom arrow stuff. And then let's say the child is still very, very young, because the child is only studying in what? Kindergarten. Okay, maybe kindergarten 2. So they draw the thing correctly on the workbook. So now the mother will reward the child with maybe a bit of M&M's chocolate, because he finished the homework and this time around he finished it correctly. Okay, so you are actually encouraging the child to pay attention to what they choose, what they had chosen not to. Got it? So they can be retrained. In other words, there is no stupid people. Or rather, I should say there's no stupid person. It's all a matter of mental training. Of course, this is not totally true. There are some people who are neurologically hardwired another way. They think differently. The statement is still correct. There is no stupid people. There can be people with underperforming thinking because they have neurological problems. But if they don't have that, then there is no stupid people. It's only about how we get people to pay attention to materials. Now, the other thing that surfaces much later is the ability to divide attention. You notice that ever since young, your parents probably, and maybe your teachers later tell you, don't become distracted, always focus on one thing, correct? How many never got nagged this way? You can click that raise hand button. Any lucky soul here that never got nagged? Or you are so powerful, you started nagging your parents first before they can nag you? Unfortunately, this is bad news. Very, very bad news. Now, focusing on one thing is not that bad yet. But after being nagged, most people then started to acquire a habit of really focusing on only doing one thing. But the true human potential is actually multitasking. All right. Maybe except the guys, since they keep saying the guys cannot multitask right now. Okay, guys, before you throw chairs at me, I was joking. Now, multitasking is really the way to go. For a very simple thing, right? Maybe I don't even need scientific evidence. Let me ask you a few questions to let you see why this is so. Take a look at the world outside. How many people can actually drive a car? Doesn't matter whether it's manual car or auto car. How many people can drive a car? Hundreds of thousands of people in Singapore, maybe, and millions of people in the world, correct? Don't they all multitask? Especially those driving manual cars. First of all, your eyes have to be on the road, and it's not just happily make your face look forward. You literally dart your eyeball looking for dangerous traffic condition. So you are taking in information, calculating the risk all the time, adjusting your speed. But how do you adjust your speed and direction? You have to control the steering wheel. You have to control the leg work on the accelerator, the brakes, and maybe the clutch if you are driving manual car, and at the same time you got to shift your hand if you are not a one-hand driver. So you have to shift switch one of your hand to always manage the gear change lever. That's a lot of things to do, you know? And that's not including the most important thing when driving, which is what? Which is to talk to the passenger. Something that all beginner drivers hate on. Yeah? Think back, those of you who have license, when you first learn to drive, didn't you like in your heart tell the instructor to, can you like shut up and don't talk to me when I'm driving? Because you haven't learned to multitask, right? But afterwards, right, it's no problem. You drive with one eye closed somehow and then talk to the passenger. That's because you have learned to multitask. Our attentional resources actually allow us to multitask. People playing piano, in fact, they are so good, they train one ear to listen to one set of keys, the other ear to another set of keys. So we are actually multitasking creatures. If we force ourselves to be singularly focused and we become too engrossed in it, very likely we will end up wasting a bit of time, because you are too engrossed. Improvement can only be made so much when you are very, very engrossed. I'm not saying that being engrossed is not good, but there are a lot of situations out there that we do not need to become equivalent of an Olympic athlete. So in that case, we need to be very real life about things, which requires multitasking. Okay, using computer is one basic thing. You look at the screen, but you're typing away without looking at the keyboard. So in other words, we can, and for tasks that we are no longer used to, or we have self-hypnotize ourselves with false beliefs, you can retrain yourself. So as early as 1960s, psychologists tested and found that the initial experiment wasn't really a very strong, but it was I feel like it's the most meaningful one, because everybody could understand that experiment. Basically, right, the researchers invited two students, university students, as their lab rat. Now, for the next, if I remember correctly, it was 8 or 9 weeks. No, it was 13 weeks. Yeah, it was a 13-week program, and these two students, right, they had to report Monday to Friday every day except weekends to the lab, and for 2 hours they would be doing just this task. They will put on an earphone, which will be telling them a story, and they have to read a book, which is about another story, and then they are tested on a comprehension test of both stories. So in the first week, right, when they first started, the baseline, it was them bad. Basically, they listen to one story and then they read another story. Because the stories were different, it couldn't go in, and they failed badly at both comprehension tests. After 13 weeks of training, they could read one thing, listen to another thing, and by then a different subject matter also. And at the same time, right, when they were tested separately, they scored more than 80% correct for every one of the information. So that means they have successfully learn to split up and make divided attention possible. Okay, so this can be done for a lot of things. Some people train their left hand to write something, the right hand to write another thing. Because they do this for performing arts. But then it can also be useful if you just spend some time, like let's say 15-20 minutes a day doing this, one hand write shorthand, the other hand write normal alphabets, and you go to lecture, you will be amazing. Because with your one hand, you record down all the things that are said with shorthand. The other hand, you write down all the things that you see projected on the board. Okay, at least in notes form. So this is the power of divided attention. It's possible to train ourselves not to lose any bit of information, which means the dotted line can be made to become continuous line. All right, we have now just left this to computers to do, because we keep believing that humans, it's not possible for us to pay attention to everything. But the truth is, actually, we can, or at least almost close to 100%. Okay, So for this, the thing is, then people will ask, how do we improve on it? First of all, we need to improve the overall capacity first. That means you got to become more energetic. That's why, right, some people push this to the next level by what? Look at Japanese companies. They say it improves safety, but actually what happens is every time you go to work, right, every morning they will make the staff do group exercise. One thing is actually to increase the arousal level, so their attentional capacity, right, this whole thing becomes a bigger circle. Then they have more attention to use. When they have more attention to use, they can attend to more stimulus at the same time. It reduces the risk of error as well as accidents. Now, one thing you can do is you can ask yourself, why do I want to do a task? Like, why do I even want to attend Mr. Lam's lecture? So always so dry, so heavy, wow, so sian. Okay, sorry, it's English there. Just forget the last 10 seconds of your life, okay? So ask yourself, and what impact does it make on you? It's quite difficult to always engage in a new task all the time. All right, but it is always possible to ask yourself, remind yourself before you start doing something, like, why did I even embark on this in the first place? So if your goals are meaningful, if the process is something you enjoy, once you remind yourself, your mind will be primed to enlarge the attentional potential. And the good thing is this can be expanded. All right. So people say, I can't be trained. It's a load of rubbish. All right. Then, of course, once your attention is expanded, you want to remember things. Now, this model was the original 1950s model about how memory works. Information comes in, you will receive in short term and then long term, but they have also discovered another memory. They couldn't isolate where it was at that time, but behaviorally, they found that there is this. Why? Because, right, when Miller first tested this in early 1950s to mid 1950s, he found that, yeah, there is indeed a difference between short-term and long-term memory. But subsequent testing, they show that when people are flashed cards, right, that are too quick. So these cards are flashed like 0.4 seconds is over. So whilst they cannot actually describe what they see, but when you give them recognition tests, right, like what was some object you saw, it was found that people picked the cards they saw correctly more than chance. Chance meaning 50-50 because it's like guesswork. So it's way above guesswork. So somehow, even though they are unaware, the information must have gotten in. Then later on, they realize, much later, I think at least 20-30 years later, they realize where this is from. Now, and you've actually learned it already. When you actually, suppose you are looking at something and that thing, right, flash past very fast, appear and then off for a fraction of a second. But you actually might have already seen it. Now, here's the question. What is the first layer of your visual system, right? What is the first layer of cell that does any form of processing? So it's not just detecting and then transmitting information, but I'm talking about asking itself, should I send this information to the brain? What was that? I think I asked this question way early, but it's another question. I think Stephanie was the one who answered it. Not sure. Yeah, the ganglion cell, right? So actually, the ganglion cells, yes, Rebecca just typed it out. Correct, thank you. A lot of parts in your body have a cluster of all these cells together doing processing. These are places where the initial memories are stored. We already have some notion of these things. Can you literally use it? Not really, because they are usually geared for emergency users. So you can't really manipulate it. So this part, no big deal. It's just good to know that we actually start to pick up information already. Some of the new age people will make a big deal out of this. They say that, wow, we have this unconscious part of ourselves. It's no big deal. You really don't have much room to make use of this information. Okay. It's just a piece of evidence there showing that your brain is more powerful than you think. So then there's short term, but this is bad because after they worked out all these things, they realized that with better instruments, the short-term capacity is really not that high. It's really, see, after 40, 50 years of testing, they realize it's like that. And it's really very short-lived. Okay. Then on the biology side, you've already learned that it's actually the hippocampus. So we know this system exists. All right. And learning about mnemonics can actually help both the long-term and short-term remember better. Organizing your information can also lead to better short-term memory. So we have ways of improving our performance. Then, so this slide all talks about how to improve your memory. And then there was Craig and Lockhart, right, showed in 1970s that if you want to remember something for a long period of time and you have a lot to remember, it's best to try and remember its meaning. So over here, now I can't demonstrate because I can't show you the special effects, the animation effects, but it's just as well. Okay. So in the experiment, what happened was they show various words to people, and all these words, right, when they flash, like table, cat, they are usually paired with some kind of other hint. And the hint is in the format of a question. So they might ask the person to, after flashing table, they may ask the person, oh, how was the word written? So people will answer as what they visually see. It's written in capital letters. All right. So this is this is simply trying to recognize the physical feature of the word. Then you have what people will ask, oh, how does it rhyme with? So they say, oh, cat, I can think of another word that rhymes, is mat, something like that. So they are actually processing the word in an auditory manner. We call this acoustic processing of information. Then some people are asked to conjure up a meaning of the word. So it's paired with, like, they ask, oh, what category do you think this is? And then they start to think of, oh, this is a flower. So it's not just simply thinking in terms of physical thing. They have to think of the meaning, like, why is this considered a flower? Well, because I see that it has petals. It is colorful with a stalk. So they start to define the features about it. But if they only stick to the physical thing, the researchers will push further, looking at why this is meaningful. Okay. And of course, they tested on people who, sorry, I should say for this portion here, this part here, okay, people will ask about, what is the definition of this? What is the category of this? So they are thinking in terms of the content meaning, or we call it semantics. This is the word here. Okay. But when they are asked to recall something nice about, let's say they were shown this word dandelion, type of flower, and the person said that, oh, tell me a story about this dandelion, why is this something that is it makes an impact on you? So the person recalls that, oh, when I got married, it was in the field, there was a lot of dandelion, so they talk about story. Now after the researchers, right, standardize, like, obviously if you have to think of this, you answer that, oh, these letters are written in capital letters. Now this is a sentence of only about 8 words. Whereas if you describe a story, it's very lengthy, right? More than 8 words. But when they standardize all this, right, the amount of content, the length of sentences you use, the number of words you use, they found in order of, so basically, right, as per the example here, they found this order where physical way of remembering things, right, will be, the information will be most easily forgotten. On the other hand, if you actually go beyond definition, but also talk about something meaningful about the thing to yourself, all right, like what is the story of yourself revolving around the thing that you have to remember, it seems like after doing this, they will never forget whatever they learned. So now, if you think about it, right, one day you need to do revision before you take the PSY 01 Foundation Psych exam. Now, hopefully that one day started before yesterday. But anyway, you still have to do it, right? Now, the thing is, have you then asked yourself, how can I remember all these dry things? I mean, oh, Mr. Lam already marked out like, wow, the green color, yellow, the white color, which one is important? Well, the thing is, how do you do it? Certainly, not everything can be made into this, but you can at least try to make it into, you can at least find out the definition, the meaning of the things you learn. So for example, right, somebody making notes of all this cognitive side may not necessarily, now during class, of course, you're just trying to copy as fast as possible about everything that's said. That's normal. Then after that, on the week comes the weekend, you might be revising the work. So the first thing to do is not to just look through the notes. Actually, it is what? It is to close the book and then try to list out what were the topics for cognitive side. So after this point, right, you say, oh, I think I remember. Yeah, it's about, oh, I can't even remember the first one. I only remember there's attention, then there is memory. And then you draw on the paper, right? You draw two words. Oh, shucks, you can't see me. So maybe, so for example, maybe you just do this. When you can write out attention, and then you write out what memory. So suppose, right, you only remember this, you forgot the first one, but that's fine. So then what you do is you draw arrows. I can't show the arrow here. Hang on,
can use
I'm
annotate.
typing out. Oh, it's in the chat, so it's recorded. So you might be actually doing this. Okay. Okay, it didn't turn out as I hoped. You can, for example, you might be listing, okay, I think I learned attention, I learned memory. Oh, I suddenly remember about attention. And then you put those with arrow, right? Filter versus fix, single versus this, you circle it. So it's almost like mind mapping the thing out. Now that would actually be still very much over at the first two levels. Then after that, right, somebody might say, actually, something about the memory thing makes sense. There's long term and there's short term. So what is it that I remember about my work last week that has to do with something I only stored short term and something that makes it long term? Oh yeah, just when, so suppose, right, you go back, yeah, last week was the company D&D, and oh my God, no wonder boss is always not around. So he was messing up with another person. So that was the affair, right? And then, so, but when you do this, it seems like you move to another story. But then some people will say, yeah, because he wasn't around, that's why I managed to pull the project through, because he wasn't there to ask too much questions. And after that, right, so very soon it was sent for tender, and then it got through, blah, blah, blah. So they think through all those things and then link it to some important event that they have heard before or that has happened to their lives. So in other words, people were doing all this. Then the revision becomes what? it becomes okay. It makes sense that there are different levels of memory because I remember such things happening in my life. So people start to link factual, very dry concepts with occurrences in their lives, making it a self-reference effect. So after that, the revision becomes more what? Rooted. So whilst people revise once, then after a week, right, they forgot 70% of it, they have to revise it again. A person who spent maybe say 5-10 more minutes going through, all right, the concepts, but linking them in some meaningful way, or trying to find in my life whether I had actually done things and it demonstrated the concepts were correct. So when a person spends a bit more effort doing that before they memorize the so-called technical terms, they actually may not even need a revision at the end of 1 week because they found that they could remember 70-80% of the material. Got it? So revision is not about taking out your notebook and a blank book and then start to rewrite everything again. It's about looking through the notes you've made when you were in class, and then you siphon out the key terms, and then you start to link them together. That's what this is about. Okay? So eventually they realize that no, short-term memory is just bad because it's inaccurate. And then they expanded and call it working memory. Because why? Problem with short-term memory is if you say that short-term is short, you can only hold information for up to 30 seconds. But there are also people who demonstrated that they remember something for about 1 or 2 minutes, after that they forget. So how short is short? Some information they decay in like a few seconds, some information decays after 2 minutes. So how can we really use time as a definition? The answer is not, because the range is too wide. But they realize one thing that is always occurring. The hippocampus, so this is the function of the hippocampus. Can you hear me? Okay. About the unstable internet. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So they realize, so this is a picture to represent, means this is a model to represent the function of short-term memory. So in your hippocampus, right, what is really happening is it will start to receive all the what from this is the stimulus. And of course, it's first registered in sensory memory, and some things that are really not important it will be moved for removal very quickly. But if you, especially if you pay attention, so this part is like your frontal lobe. You will come in, and right, the thalamus and other important areas like pons, they will direct the information to different parts of your brain. Last time they put out, now look at this diagram. This is basically looking at the functions. Doesn't tell you which part, but actually you've learned that. So the frontal lobe allows attention to shine on the material. This is probably, all right, they say that then you work on your information visually, but this is actually aided by what? Your parietal lobe, your occipital lobe, and your temporal lobe, parts of it. And this portion, right, the temporal lobe, and if you are reading and trying to make some sounds out of it, maybe it will work with your occipital lobe. So basically, we have the front part of the brain exerting its influence, the so-called spotlight. Then when it needed more help, it will engage the various parts of the brain to do something. Then when it's sent off to the specific areas in long-term, in temporal lobe, so it will eventually reach here. Then it's pulled back into the what? Into the hippocampus, all right? And the hippocampus will move the information to different places for processing. So this makes more sense than to say that we have short-term versus long-term. It is actually working memory versus long-term memory working together. All right. Now, what is important about here? Maybe all these big words. Okay. What exactly is slave system? Any question about the functions here?
Sorry, I have one question, Mr. Lam.
Mhm.
So you're saying the long-term memory and the episodic buffer, those goes under the temporal lobe?
Yes. So it's out of your hippocampus already. Okay, it moves to here. By the way, central executive, right? There are two parts. The attentional parts are usually in your frontal cortex. All right, but they have nerves into the hippocampus, and therefore this part, right? They help to move information in and out too. Then of course, people talk about what. So once the information goes in, we want them to become thoughts. But we also know that language is an extension of our thoughts. So this part most people already know. And they have evidence to support this. But some people then ask the reverse question. If thoughts expresses our if language expresses our thoughts, so meaning, right, you must, so this on your group chat, this will be real. What happened is our thoughts is expressed in the form of language, which will then lead us to take actions. Okay, on your group chat. So this is what we understand and evidence to be true. But some people then start to ask, might our thoughts be limited by our language? So the language, right, shapes your thought. Eventually, they have actually evidence to show this. Okay, let's jump to next slide first before I come back to here. This is the experiment, or rather, this was one of the experiments. So way early, I think of 60s, they tried to what they have is they had people learn a list of drawings. The drawings can be concrete drawing or ambiguous drawings. Okay. So what they do is they show a picture of this, two items. So every time they flash the thing, right? The stimulus, they flash. Okay, let's consider here. All right. They are shown this ambiguous figure, and then written beside the ambiguous figure is either the word crescent moon, all right, or the letter C. So two groups. One group would have seen this plus the word crescent moon, like if you ignore this part onwards, right? This part onwards, it's just crescent moon and ambiguous figure. Another group would see the picture of ambiguous figure and the letter C. The middle portion crescent moon is blanked out. Then after that, right, after seeing, let's say 60 of these ambiguous figures, they are tested for recall. And it was found that when they recap, right, they draw what they've seen. They don't usually draw back the same. Instead, as in exactly what they see, when they draw, you notice, right, those people who see crescent moon, they got it closer. But those people who saw this curved symbol with the spelling letter C, instead they draw this. The participants reproduce their responses in the form of drawing, and then they will draw this. And it's not just one picture like that. When they were shown another ambiguous figure paired with either the word eyeglass or dumbbell, and you look at the drawing, so they actually can recall better with priming by giving them a hint. But the thing is, the hint itself has already shaped the way they think. That's why their drawings are different. People who saw eyeglasses beside this ambiguous drawing, when they responded, they drew something that literally looked like spectacles. So this part you can say that, oh yeah, but this is so obvious, we are like playing with their minds. Well, let's take a look at another video.
In her challenge to the idea of repressed memory, Elizabeth Loftus set out to demonstrate experimentally how false memories could be implanted in some people. This came to be known as the lost in the mal technique from the first study that involved trying to plant false childhood memories in 24 participants.
We contacted their mother or their father or an older relative of theirs, and then we went back to the subject and we said, we've been talking with your mother. We found out some things that happened to you when you were about 5 or 6 years old. And we'd like to see what you can remember about these experiences that your mother told us about.
Participants were given 3 true experiences and a false one that involved being lost in a shopping mall as a 6-year-old.
Your mother told us that you were shopping at the corner shopping mall on a Saturday one time, and you were by the pet store, and all of a sudden you disappeared and you were gone for the longest period of time. And eventually we found you, you were crying, and an elderly woman had rescued you and brought you back to the main office. Do you remember that experience?
The researchers were able to plant false memories in 25% of their participants, a statistically significant figure. And what surprised them was the rich detail of these false memories.
They would start telling us things, details about the appearance of the person who rescued them, other kinds of details that we had never mentioned to them. So that showed that they were putting a lot of sensory detail onto this created memory.
From this investigation, Loftus set out what she thought was the recipe for planting false memories. First, you need the client's trust, and therapists usually had that. Then you suggest something that might have happened, and bring in persuasive supporting evidence.
So she would go into therapy with an eating disorder or depression or whatever her problem is, and she'd end up with a therapist who says, everyone I've seen with those problems was sexually abused as a child. I wonder if anything like that happened to you.
So third, you ask clients if they can remember this happening to them. And sometimes they begin to add their own details. They take ownership of the memory.
This was going on really all across North America and then other parts of the world. Families were being destroyed in the process because once people developed these memories, they then accused their family members or other relatives or other former neighbors or former teachers.
So you see, is your memory a stable and fixed thing? Now, but you say, oh, well, it's okay. As long as I avoid people like Mr. Lam, don't go for therapy, then I'm safe. Because no one can plant thoughts in my mind. Right? Of course, first of all, this is to demonstrate to you that memory, even though we know the processes, it is not something that is all-powerful. In fact, it is subjected to a lot of errors and flaws. All right? Talking to people can change your mind. But that is actually to demonstrate what? That while we arrogantly thought that our thoughts are extended through our language and thinking that we are safe from manipulation, the truth is actually the direction goes both ways. Whilst we use language to express our thinking, all right, the language can then work to influence our thoughts. So are you careful with what you say? Are you careful with what you listen to? Right? Now, how flimsy is such thing? Let's finish up.
Former anybody.
The Lost in the Mall study, The Formation of False Memories, was published in 1995, and critics were quick to point out some limitations. First, it was a small sample with only 24 participants. Second, being lost in a mall as a child is quite a common experience. Maybe it really had happened to some of the participants.
Okay, I'll let you listen to a bit of this because before you watch it, because I want you to listen to the criticisms about it. But you find that all these things, right, despite them saying it, they were all levied against the so-called robustness of the experiment. They actually never refuted the findings. So today we still know that memory is a flimsy thing. So think about it. What do you think is under what kind of problems would this lead to? Okay, think about it for a while. Can you still trust what the witness in court say? Especially when they describe something that is supposed to be very violent. No, there's a lot of arousal. Might it actually change the way that they form memories? Okay, the answer is actually yes. I'm trying to switch you back to the screen. All right. So what we have seen is that language can affect us, and it affects us in more than one way. If you are, when you are forming memories of things and you got primed by some suggestive word, for example, your answers will be limited to the priming. If you are told, in fact, it's not that this is just like words. Most people don't remember this, but what about meaningful stories? So if someone feeds you with bullshit, all right, or you keep telling yourself certain beliefs that is not true, very soon you will live out in that way. So that is one reason why I keep saying that, you know, people can actually learn optimally at optimal speeds, right? Even when they are up to 70, 75 years old. But you find that when you talk to others, a lot of old people will tell you, no lah, I cannot learn as fast as I used to. Young people learn faster. These are some of the bullshit that our culture, our society has fed us with. All right, or you must concentrate, you must focus, don't be distracted. So we start to pick up ways of doing things, and we find that, okay, so that's the usual way, but it's actually not. It actually has very strong limiting features. Okay. Now, last bit of evidence is that now this part, right, has got a, let's look all the way back to when it first started. Now, in the 50s, it was possible for American scientists to actually study indigenous people, because at that time, right, some indigenous people, meaning like the American Indians, right? So they were native to the land. So the Navajo are a bunch of people that are indigenous. Now the thing is, English-speaking children, right? So the so-called Angmoish people, in US at that time, the 50s, most of them, they learn from their parents, and then they have already established a system of education. All right, they learn things in a more theoretical way, not so much through life experiences, not so much through practical use of things. On the other hand, right, children who live with their tribes, all right, or with their indigenous people, they have also a lot of chores to do. So in the end, right, they tend to be more practical kind of people, pragmatic. And indeed, this was what happened. If you look at this slide, at the corner, there's a yellow rope and a blue, just a blue strip. So what happened is, the children, they pass the children, right, a blue color rope, and ask the child to place the rope together with one of these two pictures. So you either put your rope onto this, or you put your rope onto, not sure whether you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Okay, so you either put that blue color rope right together in this group, or you put the blue color rope in this group. But what's the distinguishing feature? For people who put the blue rope right together with this, they are driven by the word blue, which is more abstract than the thing that is rope, because a rope is a concrete, useful object. So it's concrete rather than abstract. And this is the info they found. Oops. That the indigenous people, because they have to toil and help with the tribe, and so they learn things in a more concrete, experiential way. They tend to put the blue color rope together with this. Whereas children who are very used to school, okay, they tend not to put it here. Instead, all right, 60% chance they'll put it over at this side, because they think in more abstract terms. So the way that you go through life and the words that you listen to, you talk to people, all your experiences actually shape your future decision. Then people will say, oh, but this one, how many people actually in life have to decide between where to put a rope? Oh, kidding me. I mean, it's good to know that we are influenced, but will it really affect our decision? Now, they repeated the experiment 30 years down the road. Now, by 1980s, right, you find that it's very difficult to just study indigenous people alone, because they also go to school by then, and they are now exposed to they are no longer so isolated. They're exposed to modern technologies and education. So what people like Hoffman and his gang did was that they actually tested on people who are bilinguals, all right? And they used certain words, like this word. When you describe a person as being 世故, okay, it goes beyond the English equivalent of being a sophisticated person. There is no direct translation 世故 into English. The closest you can find is sophisticated person, that sophistication. Right? In Mandarin, it would mean a combination of these. Now, what happened was, so to put a long story short, you can read about this. What happened is they got people who were bilinguals, but they are different bilinguals in the sense that they are either more English dominant or Chinese dominant, and then after that, right, because depending on their native tongue, and then they have people read, all right, certain stories that has the word, okay, and they realize that ultimately this is what they get. When so these people they are both, they can speak English, they can speak Chinese, but people who read the Chinese version, the Chinese concept of this word pops up more. So meaning, right, after that, right, when they make their decisions, it was more guided by the linguistic concept conveyed by this word. So for example, they will have more descriptions of the story that conforms to being, let's say, socially skillful, rather than being what a more show-offy person that is sophisticated. All right. When people read the English version, they tend to think of stereotypes at people like, or maybe James Bond, very sophisticated person, but that person is also more show-offy. Whereas in Chinese culture, a person who's sophisticated doesn't, you can't really tell whether a person is really that sophisticated. Usually a lot of these highly sophisticated people, they are quite hidden, and they are hidden because they know more than the other person, they know how to hide, and they are socially skillful. Got it? All right. Now, but this is very important. Why? Because not only did the concept of language can also backfire and influence the decision you're thinking. It also demonstrates that little decisions are actually primed by our language. And remember, we make big decisions after making several small decisions. So what if before you do something, you have already, all right, been, your life, for example, have already been decided? Because all the small things, small decisions you make, right, that will eventually lead to big decisions in your life, they were based on the way you accept language. Now, here I want to throw you back something. We'll end in about 5 minutes. Now, how do you think this can be useful for you? Knowing now that your language will affect the way you think and make decisions in the future. Anyone? Maybe I throw in a bit more question to narrow down the scope. How might you expose yourself to information? Yeah, one of the things will be, as mentioned by Rebecca, learn things through what? Through multiple languages. We are fortunate that for those of you who have passed through Singapore educational system, we were forced to become bilinguals. We may not be superb bilinguals, because if you notice, there are a lot of people who will speak slightly broken English out there, and they will speak their native tongue, of course. And some people, they speak perfect English, but you find that they are slightly weaker in their native tongue compared to a person who really can speak native tongue only. But the thing is, it has also been shown that not only will when you learn things in multiple languages, right, you actually make quicker decisions and you make more comprehensive decisions. Solutions are more forthcoming. So in this case, it is better to be a multilingualist. Even if you are broken a bit in that language, it's still not too bad. So limiting oneself to only bilingualism, it's limiting your problem-solving capacity. Okay? All right. So occasionally pick up another language is good. And later on, they found why this is good. Apparently, two things. One, when we learn another language, we also expose ourselves to its grammar, structure, and the way they conceptualize things. So in this case, right, we start to become more mentally flexible because we learn a new way of thinking. So that explains why, language can affect us, but it's not just simply because of the words, but because of a new way of thinking. Then the other thing is, apparently, right, your language center has to increase in size. Now, the area won't really increase after you've passed the age of 10, but the way the neurons reconnect, right, it may become denser in some parts of the brain. It can expand wider a bit. All right, the totals physical location size allocated is still the same. All right, but so for example, right, what happened is you look at the left side of the brain, it will still be in the left side of the brain, and your left brain won't become bigger. But if you look at the connections, there will be more. And the surrounding area, that small, tiny area that deals with your language center, like Broca's, Wernicke's, especially the Wernicke part, it may widen just a bit. Okay, so no increase in actual physical size of the brain, but the connections are more. But this is helpful when it comes to stroke, for example. So you are actually doing a form of preventive action. There are situations where people who are multilinguals, then after a stroke, right, they find that they can't speak one language yet, because they already are master in more than one language, they are able to still retain the ability to communicate in another language. So this is the other thing. You are going to be better problem solver, and you are going to maybe prevent the worst from happening should, let's all touch wood, one day we acquire a stroke to the brain. All right. Now, other things I want to emphasize it, you can read about what this is. So there are certain ways to retrain your mind to use information so that you can almost have photographic memory, or you can remember lots and lots of things. So you don't have to jot down items when you go grocery shopping. All right, you want to buy 30 items, you just run through the list once for half a minute to 1 minute, and you can do it. All right, because I don't want to go through, because first of all, these are not really within the syllabus. Next, it's highly popularized on the internet, so it's not difficult. So I've given you a link here, you can go check it out. This is method of loci has also become made famous by the show Sherlock Holmes. Okay, but they really exaggerated it. Okay, now let's sum up, and then we skip through some of this. I think the rest of the slide not so important. Now, in a nutshell, we have now covered almost everything that we want to talk about in cognitive psychology. First of all, you learn throughout information coming in, you first sense it and perceive it. Then you know that if you pay attention to it, it's going to help. But to make yourself believe that you have to be very, very focused is silly, because we are all capable of divided attention. Then the next thing is we also make use of what? Language. All right, by maybe thinking or by describing something in different languages, or by actively learning another language, we actually help ourselves. We also prevent some debilitating problems when it comes to communicating with others and problem solving after a stroke. Okay, that's health prevention issue. So all these things, right, it's found out and then used to make our thinking better, to generate solutions. And of course, the information here is used in all these other areas. I'm not going to focus on them. These other areas, right, what they do is they test out with experiments whether it's what we have discussed so far is true. So far the answer is yes, it's all true. And then because in 80s, right, people could program very fanciful things and computers became much faster. So right now what happens is you find that cognitive psychology makes a major contribution to all the artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, right, they may need programmers to initiate the thing, but the programmers need some kind of blueprint to work on. And that is provided by cognitive psychology. The blueprint of thinking is being coded into computers to make the computers think. Now that's how you have artificial intelligence. We'll have more to say about artificial intelligence next week. So of course, you also, this part I don't think I want to highlight, you've already encountered some cognitive neuropsych. And this also you've learned about it. Now, before you leave, one last thing that I like you to think about. So you've learned that there are various methods to increase our ability to learn. The thing is, therefore, since you know all this, I'd like you to consider this question. Actually, two parts of a question, two parts forming one big question. Take a look at the chat. Okay, the general question is, do you think you are the full owner of all the decisions you make? I mean, if you drink and you're drunk, that's another story. I'm talking about when you are, all right? So maybe you've slept for the night, you feel refreshed, you woke up in the morning, and then even deciding simple things like what should I eat? All right. And if, let's say, right, so for example, maybe you are also like me, a pet owner. So your cat destroyed your kitchen overnight. Then you wake up, and then will you like, oh shucks, I'm gonna scold one of you? All right. How likely are you able to curb this this impulsive act of shouting at your pet. Like some people, I don't literally mean that you will shout like you are a ghoul, you know. But sometimes we vent out frustration. Oh my God, or something like that. We might say certain things because we are stimulated. So what are the chances you give vent to this? A trivial but impulsive act of venting. Okay, so that's it. Any question? Think about it. We'll start off with this question next week. All right, with a class activity. Okay, I'm done.